Jabavu village resident Ntombizanele Mtsizela and her 3 children have been laid to rest today in the Eastern Cape. The 35-year-old mother allegedly poisoned her daughters and then took her own life in one of a growing number of cases of femicide in the Eastern Cape. Newzroom Afrika's Boy has tonight's report.
The 11-year-old's cry reminded the family, as well as villagers, on why they were gathered at the Mtsizela family home. Sabelo Sukundwana, uncle to the late mother Ntombizanele, described her as a soft-spoken woman who kept to herself. Bulelwa Mkhananda, a neighbor, says Ntombizanele started a business selling vegetables and chips before she left the village to look for work. She adds that the 35-year-old returned to the village but was not as social as she was before she left.
Bantwana bam thayike bahlala nyani wakhupha le plastic kule plastic kukhona ibhotile yezikhaselite eyi2 ngephezolo basele ezi4 wakhupha eyi1 wakhupha la pilisi ibina2 wayifaka kobutywala wabese ekhupha ikomiti kusho ukuthi bekhona ikomiti kule plastic wabese bagalelela ethi mabasele waqala ngomncinci ona 8 wamthelela wasela umntana weza kulo una 11 usindileyo wasela wamgalelela wasela weza kulo una 14 wathi luna 14 hayi mama ngeke ndiyisele lento.
Despite the refusal from the 14-year-old to drink, Ntombizanele eventually got her way after threatening to strangle her eldest daughter. Petros Machola from the Kula Foundation Development Project has urged the relevant government departments to continue working closely in supporting the surviving 11-year-old girl. He adds that government still has a long way to go in availing information about legal adoption and skills development in rural Eastern Cape.
After this, when she is discharged, we asked, where is she going? Is she coming back here? Because to me, she's not comfortable in the village. I don't know why, but someone has to tell us the truth, because she's not comfortable. So we have to dig down until we get to the bottom of the problem. But taking the child from this environment to a boarding school will work best for all of us.
Ntombizanele Mtsizela leaves behind her mother, sister, and 11-year-old daughter. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Boy at Jabavu village in Port St. John's.
For more on that story, let's bring in the Teddy Bear Clinic's Dr. Shaheda Omar. Very good evening to you, Dr. Omar. Good to have your time tonight on a very tragic story. You and I spoke not too long ago about another incident in the Eastern Cape where a mother had killed her children and then herself, and there is concern about what appears to be an emerging trend in the Eastern Cape. Any indication of why we're seeing this occurrence, especially in that part of the country, seemingly so often?
So if we look at the landscape of the Eastern Cape, we need to look at how rural it is, how disadvantaged the communities are. If we look at the existing infrastructure and resources, they are very few and far between. The access and availability to support structures are not within immediate reach. I think that is something one needs to consider. But beyond that, I think just the reality is where mothers are actually seeing their desperate situations and are becoming so desperate in resolving the situation. Now, having seen other cases of filicide, maternal filicide, and where people are only recognized for their pain, suffering, and trauma after they have taken their lives, it's almost as if their pain and suffering has been invisible to those around them, those that they are surrounded by the structures that are also outside of their own reach. So what we're finding is that this copycat mimicking seems to be a solution, a way forward, that by doing this, resorting to this kind of measure, they will then be recognized, revered, and even understood for the suffering that they have endured. So, it's not, no normal person can actually reduce themselves to that level. One needs to actually put oneself in the person's shoes, the victim and the mother that has taken the life of her children and herself, to put, oneself in that position and actually wear those lenses and see where she's coming from. Because for her, all support structures have collapsed. She's got nowhere to go. There's no door to open, no one to actually reach out to, appeal to, and there's no hope. There's absolutely no hope. So this is something that we need to really look at deeply. And I think my learned colleague I heard speaking to the skills development, looking at the resources that are available at the push of a button, because this is few and far between. The entrepreneurship skills development, small business funding, all sorts of support structures for children, where there's care, aftercare services, child minding, so that at least mothers are given more leverage to empower themselves and to become more employable, or to be able to generate income. So I think poverty certainly has a huge role to play. There are interpersonal relationships, conflicts, etc. But poverty seems to be the most determining factor if we're looking at the Eastern Cape.
So, Dr. Omar, it's one thing to hear that, right? We hear often about filicide and mothers who, especially in cases such as what we're discussing tonight, are said to have killed themselves and their children because the situation they were facing is so desperate. When you hear this case, this woman took the children from their home, took them elsewhere, basically set up what was like a picnic-like setting, gave out, we're hearing, allegedly, poisoned drinks, and then when the one child tried to get away, she threatened that child with strangulation. And what it raises is the question of whether perhaps sometimes these murders by mothers may not be to do with the desperation of the situation, they may just be premeditated attacks.
Well, it is premeditated. If we just look at the circumstances, it's not something that's just done randomly. They have given it considerate thought. They have actually looked at, probably explored options and see that there's no options available to them. And I would still say that this mother resorting to actually strangulating her child must have been absolutely not only out of her mind, but she saw that they were trapped, that there was no exit out of this. Immobilized, she was definitely in a state of dysregulation, that flight or fright and freeze mode, and that's where her emotions were. She could not be on the level, where the cortex is functioning and to be able to reason, the abstract thinking or problem solving, because she, being stuck in this mode of thought and, experience.
I suppose premeditated wasn't the right turn of phrase from my end. What I was trying to tease out is why, and I'm trying to find the right wording here because it's such a sensitive story. Could it be that some of these mothers are just killers?
Well, absolutely. If we look at the different, filicides, we find that there's even, there's the revenge filicide, getting back at the father, getting back at somebody. So it's of course a hateful crime, but there's also the pathology, underlying pathology where they snap. So it could be just, in the moment, in the heat of the moment, where it becomes an act that they're not able to control their impulses and just resort to violence and brutal killing.
And when you come to the child who survived now, Mr. Petros Majola, one of the community workers there speaking to our reporter Siboso Tuboy, said that the one child who survived seems quite uncomfortable to be back in the village, no doubt because of what this child witnessed. I mean, the death of their siblings at the mother's hand and the mother herself then ending her own life. What is the best way to assist that child?
Well, if we look at the reality of the situation, there's a lot of ambivalence in this child. She probably hates what her mother has done to her siblings, to her, and the multiple losses, because now she doesn't have siblings, she doesn't have a mother. She's torn between and betwixt, where she continues to love her mother, but she also hates her mother. And the survivor guilt, why did she, live through this, and that she's now going to have to live through this ordeal, and the stigma, the humiliation, that people are going to look at her and going to label her as the young girl whose mother killed her other siblings and who attempted to kill her as well. So I think the emotions are so mixed, and if one looks at the intervention, it's going to be long-term intervention, intensive therapy, a lot of support, and a lot of love and care that this young girl needs.
Is removing her from the community right now the best thing to do for this child?
Well, moving her out of the community, I think certainly would assist her, moving her into a place where she has comfort and support and containment, which is of immediate, necessity, where she can be supported, contained, and feel a sense of security, not feel judged or labeled.
And it's going to take, no doubt, lifelong work to be able to live with this, having witnessed such a gruesome scene.
Indeed, and living with this, I think, is for her, it's certainly a fate worse than death. That she would rather, as we speak, she's probably thinking that she should have just died and all this would have been gone and behind her. But to live with these images, the post-traumatic stress disorder, being haunted and plagued by the images, the recurrent nightmares, the hypervigilance. I think there's a lot, where there's going to be things, faces, images that will remind her and trigger those haunted memories that she witnessed.
Dr. Shaheda Omar, good to speak to you.